Alright, so I was originally gonna do just like a book versus movie thing strictly with The Running Man, since we talk so much Stephen King on this channel, and the fact that this is our fourth big Stephen King thing this year as far as movies go. We also had The Institute earlier, and we've got Welcome to Derry, which is still going. So it's been a really good year to be a Stephen King fan, and I was going to just kind of stick with that, but I thought the fact that we had two movies here now that kind of have the Schwarzenegger connotation, we can just go ahead and talk about those together. We're still going to talk about the book for The Running Man a little bit as we go into the movie itself, but yeah, I just went ahead and paired these two up. So let's go ahead and start with the Running Man, which was something that I was on board with pretty much immediately as soon as I heard about it. Because around the time I did a video a few years ago talking about Schwarzenegger's Running Man with Gamer, the Gerard Butler movie, and in that video we talked a lot about how that movie basically has nothing to do with King's book much at all, except the name Ben Richards, and I think Dan Killian might be the same name also. I don't remember for sure, but so everybody was saying like, oh, there's going to be a Running Man remake, and the word remake kept getting thrown around a lot to a pretty irritating degree when you knew that it was going to be an actual adaptation of the book, because it's like, that's just a totally different movie entirely. And then I saw that not only was it Edgar Wright, but that Michael Bacall was going to be writing it, who has a pretty impressive resume also. So everything about this seemed like it was the right call, no pun intended, to do it this way. And the fact that it could be, because the book is very adaptable, especially for now. It's so interesting that it actually came out in 2025, the year the book is set, basically by accident, because Wright was actually trying to get it out a little sooner, but there were just enough setbacks that serendipitously this is what happened. So a lot of expectations on that front, and the fact of when you read the book, you can actually see like almost like Edgar Wright editing in it. Like one of the opening scenes of the book when they're giving him like the questionnaire is like written in a way that's almost like it's edited like an Edgar Wright movie. So it's, the more you thought about it, the more everything seemed to fit. So as far as when reviews started coming out, again, I try not to really look at that much at all, to have just kind of as much of a blank slate as possible, since I already don't watch, trailers or any promotional stuff or stuff like that. So, but there were a couple of things here that I did hear that kind of made me hesitant a little bit, which is a feeling I hate going into a movie with ahead of time, but usually I can brush it aside, but there were a couple of things that actually stuck with me, like, oh god, I'm trying so hard to ignore that, but I don't know if I can. One of which was just the general sort of underwhelming nature of the reviews, and I could kind of see, especially when it comes to certain changes, where if you read the book, probably have to be made. Like maybe there'll be disappointment in how those changes were made and which directions they went, which ultimately does seem to be the case. But there's also something I saw where somebody had said it was Edgar Wright's most anonymous movie, where a director with a very specific style does a movie and it doesn't feel like them. And it feels more like they were hired to do a job rather than something that really fits in with their filmography and their style and just the way they do movies in general. And that and the fact that we've seen that happen so often, even with great directors, made me so worried, because it was so believable that that can happen. So I tried to block that out of my head, but also kind of set an expectation of maybe don't expect a full-blown Edgar Wright movie. Like, set your expectations somewhere that aren't, like, super high, and maybe it'll be okay. And what's really interesting going into the movie with that mindset is that this movie does have a clear energy about it. Like, if this was by, like, an unknown director, or a director that had just done, like, one or two movies but hadn't really made a name for themselves or anything, you might come away saying, wow, that movie had like a nice, cool energy to it. But because you know Edgar Wright's specific type of energy, it makes this feel very muted just by those standards. Like, knowing it's an Edgar Wright movie makes it feel much more downplayed in how energetic it is. But I do feel like if we didn't know Edgar Wright as a director, I think there would still be people would come away thinking it has like a cool vibe to it. But yeah, those standards and starting off with those do make it feel like that there's something missing, that there could have been something a bit more cutting in more ways than one about it. And like I said, the fact that you can even see that in the book also might bring that down a little bit. But we do get, these moments, like, we get, like, a nice opening sequence. It's sort of reminiscent of the opening of Baby Driver when he's walking around town to get coffee and the opening credits are happening. Again, maybe not with as clever editing or details or anything, but still, the vibe is there to an extent. And then when he's going through, like, his training and his tests, and we get these, it's intercutting with, like, his previous job experience and how that's helping him in this. There's this really wild transition where he's getting on an elevator, and it's transitioning into Lee Pace shooting watermelons, and they explode. And there's a split second in the transition where it just seems like Glen Powell's head spontaneously explodes into a watermelon as it's making that transition. That was pretty insane. So there are moments there like that, but it's also like where your expectation is as far as what you expect out of Edgar Wright energy. Like it can make it feel a bit like it's being suppressed, because you do still have characters who are like talking fast. And you have the moment when he's talking to Brolin, and Brolin says something really out of line, and there's a split second where he imagines smashing Brolin's face into the table for just a second. And it's like, you can see it in there. And it's weird because this is kind of throughout the movie. Because there will be action moments in the movie, like, Michael Cera's scene, or the scene where he's being chased by Lee Pace at the hotel and the explosion happens and he's down in the sewer and that whole thing happens. And it's like, and once these sequences end, you're like, whoa, that was like a real rush. It's like, yeah, this is kind of what we came here for. This is the Edgar Wright feel. But then you realize when they happen how kind of more few and far between they are, whereas in most Edgar Wright movies, that feeling feels like a constant. Like you're just constantly going down that path. I've had my criticisms in the past of Scott Pilgrim. I think it runs out of gas before it gets there. And I think this kind of gives me similar vibes to how I felt about that, I think. Except that here, rather than it sort of running out of gas at some point and never really coming back, it's almost more frustrating that these moments, these rushes, do keep popping their heads back in at random times throughout it. But when those happen, you realize how kind of maybe dragging everything is in between those moments. So like, its highlights almost do it a disservice to everything else, which is a really complicated feeling. But you still have great moments here, especially in the opening moments, like when we get like the whole opening sequence of the Running Man show itself. I love just the pandemonium of the show in the studio with Coleman Domingo's like just completely going off in this part. He's definitely, I'd say, the standout performance of the whole movie, and that's where like the really big energy is. It's that case of when you have this energy in the studio when Coleman Domingo's on stage, that's kind of the feeling you feel like the whole movie should have, that kind of vibe and energy. But it's, I said, it just seems like it kind of goes in and out like a roller coaster, and that's kind of an issue. But as far as Glen Powell goes, I know some people are probably getting sick of him at this point. I still love Glen Powell for the most part. I haven't watched like his new show yet or anything. Maybe that has something to do with it, but yeah, I still think he's got he could just be one of those bland people that they're just forcing on us. But I don't. I think he's got a lot of talent and a lot of charm and a lot of charisma and presence. And I think Hitman has a lot to do with that, because I loved that movie so much, and how much he showed he can do in one performance. Also, the stuff he does with Linklater, like Everybody Wants Some. I've been a fan for a little while now, and watching him here, we do get, because if you know the story, you know that Ben Richards is going to have to go through like multiple disguises and personas to hide as he runs through the city and various other cities throughout. And he's going to kind of get to do the hitman thing again, do the disguises and the different voices or accents or whatever. Not to the creativeness and the fun that he was doing in Hitman, but... And again, though, with the Edgar Wright standard, you would think that's not just a throwaway criticism. That's like a... This really should have been a lot more than it was, it feels like. Being set to that standard. But I think particularly also where the humor comes from, because... Obviously, there's going to be something very satirical going on here, because King wrote his book in, like, the early 80s, and there's stuff that you can translate directly from the book that feels like it's a very modern satire, whether it be, like, the use of deep fakes or ads or whatever it is. You're going to get stuff like that. There's a bit I kind of like, even if they ran into the ground a little bit, was the car, Emilia Jones's car, that he sort of hijacks at the end, and it's talking, and anytime they make, like, one little choice or suggestion or whatever, the car says, like, nice. Like the AI in the car is, like, overly encouraging. I do like that detail. There is, like, you know, very Edgar Wright moments of humor in here, like when he's dangling off the sign, and the letter Y is coming down on him, and he screams Y at it. It's executed much better than it sounds explaining it. It's a very Edgar Wright visual joke, it feels like. So, again, it's all in there. And there's stuff like, when we see, just these little moments, like when he's looking out the window and he's, like, narrating what the people outside his window might be saying, or when he's watching a reality show, and it's one of those reality shows that's just insufferable rich people being rich people. And so there's stuff in here, and that humor is in there, but it still feels like there's just a wall that it's not quite getting over. It's just almost like the greatness is there. It's in view, and it's just not quite reaching it. And there's also stuff in here where they kind of play with the tone a little bit, because there is that humor, but then it's also a big action movie. But then there's also this emotional foundation, because he's got his wife and daughter who are driving him here. There's a moment in the book that's really throwaway, and I don't think even mentioned again, where he finds one of his daughter's socks in, like, his wallet, and he's like, he doesn't know how it got there. And they do a smart thing here by deciding to use that to kind of continue the emotion in the movie, to have that be like a keepsake to him as he goes through this. But it still feels like all these things are present, but not quite pushing them completely in that place they need to go. But you've also got this Michael Cera character, which, by the way, the casting of Michael Cera is funny anyway, because the character in the book is described as being immensely fat, and, like, his whole time in the book, he keeps getting... His main obstacle is just that he's too fat to do anything, and now he's, like, slim Michael Cera. And the thing holding him back this time is that he seems to just be insane, and his mother seems to be insane. And in the book, I think it's just that his mom gets paranoid and, like, sounds the alarm. But here they go into almost... Because you think about King, and typically you associate King with horror, and it's like, even in stories like this, King horror can rear its head. Like, when you read the book, there's the sequence with Bradley, and he has the nightmare in the book that's very... It feels like it goes into real horror territory there, in just the description. And in here he does have nightmares, but it's more like they just kind of bleed into the action, and it just feels like a general dream sequence. But here, the Michael Cera character and his mom has this maniacal laugh that feels like it's straight out of horror as she's sounding the alarm. And then they add this other detail to Cera to make him significantly more reckless than he is. He has, like, this random backstory about his dad that I think is supposed to fall into the humor, but it also feels like almost too random. But then I guess it's setting up why this action sequence gets set off. But even so, it does feel like he's entered another world. which is a fun idea, because he's gonna meet all kinds of different, insane characters and get into different situations. But it does feel like we've really veered into something else here with the choices they made here. Which still, I don't really hate them. What actually kind of bothers me is I'm wondering how I'd feel about this scene if I hadn't seen another movie earlier this year. Again, it's the standards it's already set at are really doing it a disservice. But the scene where Michael Cera goes off is one moment where it's like, oh, there it is. There's the Edgar Wright movie. But this, what I think they wanted to accomplish with this scene was actually already done even crazier. It's pretty much like the same scene and the same setup and everything. The Amazon movie Heads of State with Idris Elba and John Cena has a scene just like this where Jack Quaid does exactly what Sarah does in this, and the scene in that movie is actually crazier than this one and more off the wall and insane and over the top. So, again, it's really trying to get out of your head the Edgar Wrightness that should be in this movie. And you would think, maybe it was just a job movie or whatever, but I've been watching, I don't know if it's due to my reaction to the movie, but I've been watching interviews with Edgar Wright about this movie, and it does seem like he was invested in it. So, I don't know, maybe he's just, good at marketing or whatever, or hiding that or something, but I mean, I get the vibe he was really invested in this movie and really wanted to make it, so where all the opportunities were to be such an Edgar Wright movie, it's so weird that it's not. And like I said, I kind of had that idea going in, which I hate, and I wish I could have been able to push that out, but the movie just kind of kept proving that point, that it doesn't really feel like him, or it feels like a very muted version of him. Or like if this came out and it was an anonymous director and somebody would say like, it's trying to be Edgar Wright, maybe. But even then I feel like you could only say, in certain moments it seems like it's trying to be Edgar Wright. Other times it just feels like a normal movie. So I don't know what that says. But yeah, and they do throw in some meta stuff in here where like how the character of Bradley, who I do think was nicely cut down in this movie. I think the Bradley sequence in the book is a little, it feels like it goes on forever. So I like that they kind of slimmed that down a little bit here. But the way he introduces Ben to like the structure of the show, and then Ben's able to decipher like who's gonna die next and where he can go and how he can be the one that comes out on top. There's something there, and then the way that kind of ties into the direction we go with... Oh, and before we go to the ending, Amelia, Amelia Jones's character, feels like a pretty rushed character in the book, I remember, and this being a pretty close adaptation, she feels pretty rushed in the movie, too. It kind of shows up just to get Ben to the climax, and they try to make more out of it, but it's just a character to kind of push Ben into the climax and get to where he needs to be, and the movie didn't really feel that much different from that. And so I won't outright say what the ending is yet, since it's still fairly new, but I do... It's another one that's kind of frustrating in similar ways that the entire movie is, where it's like, okay, I like what you did here, but this part might be a cop-out, or this part you could have ended the movie just a little sooner, I think, and you would have been good, but there's good ideas in how they changed the ending. Because we know, I assume people are aware that the book ends with the protagonist flying a plane into a building, which, as far as heroic moments go, doesn't really feel like a heroic moment over the last 24 years or so, so it makes sense that you're going to change that. I will say I'm surprised how much of the book's climax is still in the movie. Like, most of the book's climax is in the movie. It's just like right at the end there where you know it's probably going to have to be changed in one way or another, is where it's like I said, they were setting up something And it's like if you... And I'm not even somebody that thinks a movie that's like a tied up in a bow is an inherently bad thing. People like really love ambiguity now, or like, oh, if it was actually this or that or whatever. It's like, you can give us a definitive ending, and that's perfectly good to me. But this is a case where I do think more ambiguity would have been a much better call, especially since they set up what could have been ambiguity so well, and then it just kept going just a little bit. There's actually one final scene, too, that I don't really mind being there, but there's one other aspect where ambiguity might have been a little better. But, yeah, so it's a mess. Just like me talking about this was a whole mess. And we're just... Yeah, I hopefully we found our place. Hopefully we got to our destination, but yeah, it's... I did find myself, like, I was never not enjoying watching it, I guess I could say. It was those moments of just, like, after the fact, like, after an action scene would happen or a big moment would happen, where there would be enough downtime to be thinking about it as it was still going and be like, okay, so I am liking this to an extent, but it does feel like there's these missing factors to it. And in a movie, in an Edgar Wright movie called The Running Man, that should be constant, you probably shouldn't have downtime to think about how you feel about the movie while the movie's still going. It should be one of those cases that is a full adrenaline rush, and then when you get to the end, it's like, wow, now that I have time to think about that, and I know certain movies and certain types of movies should have some downtime, so again they don't run out of gas, which, like I said, I feel like Wright has done in the past occasionally, but this one I feel like there was a way to be pretty... make it feel like things are constantly moving and there's constant danger and you're constantly being watched. But it just kind of doesn't really feel like that. So, and I said, even the book, has those moments where I said they kind of drag out a little bit, and you feel like it could pick up the pace a little bit. But in an Edgar Wright movie, you'd expect those problems to be fixed, and they just kind of weren't. So, to be clear, it is a pretty faithful adaptation for the most part, just minus the ending and minus Michael Cera not being extremely fat. So, I think for the most part, as far as I can remember, it's pretty close. So, we do have, like, a direct adaptation of this book now, which is nice. And something that's always kind of haunted the Stephen King fans that only had the Schwarzenegger movie to go on. So, there is that. Not that I have any beef with the Schwarzenegger movie. Like I said, there's a whole other video on that, if you're interested in that. So, let's go on to Predator Badlands, which is a movie that's probably much more surprising than it should be. Because I feel like I heard a lot of negative word when the trailers came out, and people were saying it was like going completely against what Prey was, and it was going super big, there was a lot of CGI, and compared to Prey, people, I think, just thought it kind of looked like a disaster by comparison. It was only PG-13. But it was Dan Trachtenberg still being the director, where I couldn't get that out of the back of my head. I was like, well, I wouldn't think he'd sell out that quickly. He's shown that he's too good so far, and Prey wasn't that long ago. There's gotta be something to this. There's gotta be a reason why it might be so CGI heavy and only PG-13 and can still be as good as Prey or other previous entries in the franchise. And there is a whole video of me and my brother talking about the first 5 movies. The original 4 and then Prey, and then I did a video on Killer of Killers earlier this year. And yeah, I was really positive towards Killer Killers also, so this whole Dan Trachtenberg doing Predator thing is something that I'm on board with, and like I said, I feel like there shouldn't have been a surprise to just how good this is. I feel like our trust is fully in him at this point, So, and yeah, it is like, super CGI heavy, and it does feel a lot bigger than Prey. And it does feel like maybe that could be to a fault and the PG-13 nature of it, but what's really great about the direction this franchise is going is that it does really feel like an evolution. To like where it started and where it is now, it does feel like two completely different things. But also, when you watch them, it does feel like we got here gradually, with Prey especially being like a really huge turning point of we can still do the cool old stuff while doing this also cool new stuff, and combining those things and bringing in like different tones, but being able to have a balance that ultimately makes everything work, and bringing in a story which normally is something I would probably be totally against. Because take out any doubt that might have come from a lot of CGI or a PG-13 or whatever, and talk about a story where a predator is the main protagonist. And and like I said, a lot of times I hate that shit. Where it's like, why are we like humanizing our big bad villains here? What makes them cool is that they're big bad villains and they're predators. That's what they do. So how are you gonna make one of these a protagonist of a story? And I think the main key was that even though we've seen a predator now that is a main protagonist that we sympathize with and we want to see succeed in his missions, is that it never waters down what a predator is or what they do. Especially when we have an antagonist in his father, and we see what his father and all the other predators around are still capable of. And even him as a protagonist, when he has these conversations with Elle Fanning about, like, the alpha, and how it's just his main instinct is, well, I'm going to be the alpha. Or when it's, when they do a battle, and Elle Fanning asks him what his favorite part is, and he talks about, when I sliced its head in two with my sword and I showered in its blood. And it's like, it's still very much Predator. Like, that does not change at all. It's not a watered down version at all. We're just seeing a Predator in a different environment and world with a different mission and different motivations. But otherwise, nothing has changed. If this main protagonist Predator was here with a bunch of humans, he would be terrifying still. He would be terrifying and feel like he's unstoppable. And I really love that. And the fact that you can somehow take that and pair him up with not just an android, but half an android, played by Elle Fanning, and somehow still make all of this work and make these tones work, is really crazy. And it ultimately does work. And I love what Fanning's doing here also. Because, number one, it's a dual performance, and I'm just a big sucker for dual performances, and especially the fact that she's playing two androids that are complete opposites. But this one in particular, this main one we spend time with, her physicality here, where you talk about the effects in it, but also her physicality as an actress, because the fact that she's missing her bottom half for most of the movie, and there are moments when she just like has to like walk on her hands and move in a certain way. And it's like, there's a lot of times where like you'd be able to see the special, especially now, everybody's so savvy to visual effects and how they work and stuff like that, and like the green suits and stuff like that. But her physicality here, even when it's like an obvious trick, like we only see her from like the stomach up, we don't even see where the cutoff is and she's moving, it still looks like something moving that only has an upper, that doesn't have a bottom half for leverage. And just the physicality of it is really great, let alone playing the two separate characters that are completely different, because the other one is so like soulless and is another sort of antagonist of sorts, and then having this one that's like super plucky and is like almost like becoming human, and the one that looks the least human, that can walk around while having like all of its machinery sticking out, and is so clearly a broken android, is like the most human character in the movie. Is such an interesting dynamic also. And the way that there are no humans in this, which is another thing I think makes it easily get away with the PG-13, is that there are, like, limbs ripped off and impalements and beheadings and stuff like that, but none of the characters are human, so there's no acknowledgement of it being bloodless. That really worked in its favor. Also, that's probably like not having humans in it is how you get a PG-13 Predator movie. Like it's like an equation that adds up. So, but it still manages to feel like kind of hardcore in a very Predator movie kind of way, and yeah, they throw in other stuff here, like when the environment they put him in, where it's basically like Skull Island, like the really really scary shit of Skull Island, like in Kong Skull Island most recently, how like to me Kong Skull Island is practically a horror movie with those creatures, and it feels like that's the kind of environment we're in here, and we see all the different creatures and all the different obstacles, and in this very very deadly environment, and it's where this kind of story just completely thrives, and these kind of characters just completely thrive. And seeing how they adapt to that environment, we actually get like the montage where he starts to use his environment to amp up for like a big battle, like we see the humans do at the end of a lot of these movies. Schwarzenegger gets that whole thing at the end of his movie, and to see the Predator be the one doing that now. Emperor Midthunder did that very well also. But to see the Predator doing that now, or a Predator doing that now, is so fun, and like kind of turning it in a way to where it's like, you're almost shocked we haven't gotten to this point in the franchise until now. Like, it almost makes too much sense that this is where we landed here. Like I was talking about with the evolution of the series, and how it just seems like this is where we were intended to land. With all this stuff that seems like it shouldn't work, like the having the mismatched pair between the two of them, or having the character of Bud, who's like the typical cutesy sort of character, and like it being a survival movie that we've seen that type of thing over and over again, so it should be dull to us at this point. But just everything that seems like it shouldn't work in this environment is working, and it also manages to have like layers to it, because we were talking about, like, you know, the humanization of these non-human characters, and you know, feeling things for these characters that we typically wouldn't, and going into like a chosen family sort of thing. And then there's the chosen family thing, and there's the, you know, expectations from the father, and going along with what your supposed purpose is that you're born into versus what you were meant to do or whatever. And it's like, when you think about the fact that the original movies, one of the like maybe the biggest strength of the original movie was the simplicity of it. That it's just this thing. It's them versus this thing. It's like man versus nature, but it's also man versus monster, and man becoming the monster. Like, I guess it sounds more layered when you say it like that, but at the end of the day, it's a very simple versus concept, that original movie. And so that we've now gotten to a point, you would think it would be too much, that this one has like more layers to it and more things it's trying to do, and it's like, oh, you're overcomplicating what should be so simple. But again, with the evolution of the series, it feels like we're still getting what we want, but just like more touches that give it more of a foundation, making it just as satisfying, if not more so. So that's and as far as the look of him goes, another thing might be that things might not feel as practical. It does. I'm assuming that's motion capture is what it looks like, and it's like, yeah, you could say, yeah, but you know, the old style, the practical stuff like masks and makeup or whatever, and suits and all that, would be the ideal thing. But using the motion capture in this way, to where you can actually see him emote in different ways, but it doesn't feel too fake, like you can get wrapped up in the character, and you do see, like, you do get the vibe that is an actor. And so I think that helps a lot in the humanizing aspect. Again, another thing that seems like it should be hindering it, or something that shouldn't work, but actually is a major asset in it. Just defying the odds of all that stuff and all those expectations we might have in regards to how the movie was made, let alone everything else going into it. So Yeah, I'd still say this is surprising for how good it is, and that we can now officially trust that whatever Dan Trachtenberg is going to do with this series is going to take it in some really fun and interesting new directions, but never fail to always give us what we want out of Predator movies. So, yeah, I'm on board with this continuing on in this direction. So, I guess that's all we're going to talk about here. So, again, hopefully the Running Man thoughts weren't too all over the place, but the movie is too. But Predator is much more of a sort of cohesive experience, both in the movie itself and how your emotions are probably going to be throughout it and getting what you want and hope for out of it. So we'll stop that here and then go into other stuff, like probably two at a time, or I'm still going to do a Smashing Machine video and some other stuff here and there as we go into award season and talk about the award movies and all the stuff that comes with that. So until the next thing, I think that's it.